Alright guys, what's going on? Welcome to the next episode here, race 9, sorry, season 2, race 9 here at Marina Bay Street Circuit in Singapore. We ran the time trial for our difficulty setting, and it was pretty rough. I tried it without a racing line, and it dropped me down in the 50s for the street circuit, so I was a little bit surprised, but a few more times after without the racing line, I did improve a little bit. I didn't get up into the 60s though, so I put the racing line on, and then it still had me around mid 60s, low 60s. So we are going to have the racing line on for this qualifying because this late in the season, it is a fast-paced track and it's a very narrow circuit, kind of like Monaco, that we had issues with in the last season. So don't freak out about the racing line if you guys don't like it. Don't worry, it's just for this episode, as we are going to be rounding out the end of this season in Mexico next episode. So without further ado, let's get into qualifying. Alright, real quick before we go into this, it was showing that qualifying was wet, especially the race here. The race, it might be a dry to wet race now that I look at it. So I was kind of worried that I would have had to go to my wet setup, which I have not updated, but we're gonna go ahead and stick with our dry setup for this, and hopefully the rain, we won't have to deal with the rain, but we will have to wait and see until we get to the grid on the start of the race day. So let's get into it. Alright, I knew I shouldn't have trusted myself, especially with this difficult of track. We ended up getting knocked down to P22 with a 141.426. Nicholas Latifi just barely beating us out in P21. Dan Tickton making it into Q2 at P14. I really should have gone for a third lap at the end with the new set of tires, because it was projected to have 7/10 improvement on the lap time, and that would have put us into Q2. But we're gonna take the last and do as best as we can during the street race, and see if we can get some decent positions without causing too much damage to the vehicle. But our setup should work out with it, because we do have a higher suspension setup to get over those curbs, to make sure that we don't cause any damage to the underbody of our car. So Singapore Grand Prix, starting it from the back of the pack. I got a little bit too comfortable with my time and I regretted it, so let's get right to the race.
Here we go then, it's Formula One in Marina Bay once again, and welcome to you all at home who join us today for this fascinating race around the baking hot but beautiful streets of Singapore. We have a high risk of a safety car here today, I think, as the abundance of tight corners mixed with these wet conditions could put a few cars off and into the barriers. 23 turns then, 13 to the left and 10 to the right, make up the 3.1 mile lap of Marina Bay. before we begin, let's take a quick look at the grid lineup for today's race. A fantastic effort from Charles Leclerc yesterday, and it's put him on pole, just ahead of George Russell, who starts this event from P2. As we continue through the rest of the grid today, we have Hamilton, Sainz, Sergio Perez, and Gasly, Norris, Mick Schumacher, Bottas, and Lance Stroll. Ricciardo, they'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty. Vettel, Esteban Ocon, they've taken a grid penalty. Johnson, Tsunoda, Albon, Oscar Piastri, they'll be starting further back after an earlier grid penalty. And Kevin Magnussen, Joe, Latifi, Verstappen, and Daniel Ticktum. And with lights out just moments away, it's time to go down to the track.
Okay, so the amount of penalties that are on the grid, oh my god, that's ridiculous. I was not expecting that. I know we were going to get a lot of penalties because of the shorter seasons, but the fact that we see who we saw in the back of the pack, especially Max Verstappen, is very surprising. Seems we're going to have heavy rain throughout most of the race, who might die down towards maybe three-quarter most of the way through. So we're going to leave our fuel alone, take that weight with us, and see how well we can do on a one-stop. So let's get right to it.
Right then, the formation lap has started. And I must say, the weather conditions aren't the best today for visibility and for grip. As each driver performs this lap, they'll be wanting to settle in and concentrate, as this race, in these conditions, will require a lot of focus. So as all the cars take their positions on the grid, the teams will be hoping their strategies pay off for them in today's race. The question I'm asking is, which teams have got it right, which ones have got it horribly wrong?
Alright, here we are wrapping up our formation lap, and a little bit of latency here off to the start of the race. I thought I was off to a good start, but it turned out we weren't, as Yuki Tsunoda passes us, and then Alexander Albon and Oscar Piastri pass us as well, as we take a little bit of an early break around the first corner. I believe that was the BMW of Latifi going over the inside of the corner there, as we're settling into P17 as we're still trying to fight for position. Alexander Albon passing us as he's fighting for position against Piastri. We have Joe Granu on the outside trying to fight for position against us, as we're too wide here towards the back of the pack. Joe Granu having that momentum, and Latifi trying to take the inside of this long straight here, and almost coming into the back of Joe, as we're trying to get our foot down here on lap 1, about halfway through, coming into sector 2 now. This hard right-hander being forced out to the outside, trying to get ahead of Joe Granu here to try to make a move on him, but we do fall back a little bit, as we're coming up over towards the bridge section. A little bit late on the brakes here, trying to catch up to Joe Granu, and a little bit of contact on him. So we lose the ground that we did make up here as we're coming over the bridge, and it was very, very difficult for us as we have to make a late break on the inside, but we do end up turning that into a position against Joe Granu. Moving on towards the end of lap 1. We're still sitting in P17 here, as this rain is definitely not helping us, as it's basically been following us throughout the back half of this season. So we got to try to catch up to Oscar Piastri now in the other Audi for this next part of the race up until we get to when we come into the pits. So a little bit of a good exit to start out the next lap here, as Venturi had some damage on his front wing, so he had to come in early for a pit stop here at the end of lap 1. And no position change up to lap 10, where we do elect to come in for our pit stop to intermediates. The rain did let up a little bit, but you can see that time deficit here. We're now 9.3 seconds behind Oscar Piastri in the Audi Sport. That's how rough it is with us on these full wets. And I've told you guys before, I do not like using these full wets in the rain. I feel a lot more confident on the intermediates, as several of us come into the pits here. You can see the Audi of Joe Granu behind us, and then Dan Ticktum actually came in behind him, so we're holding him up for a double stop. And with our front wing change, we had a little bit of damage. We have the Audi there in front of us, and then we also lose position to Latifi, so that position we had on him, we have to try and make up here as we come out to the pits to start lap 11. And it's basically going to be like that for the remainder of this race, trying to gain position against Latifi as he's in P17. Coming out of the pits, we almost hit his back tire. Would have been very unlucky for us if we had wing damage as we're coming out of the pits, but we have a lot of work ahead of us to do, as Valtteri Bottas tries to make a position on us here on lap 21. And we're still trying to catch up to Latifi, as we're about a half second or more behind him. But as we round out these last few corners, trying to hold against Valtteri Bottas, you can see that trying to close the gap, but we're very unlucky here as our car starts to smoke, and we have yet another engine failure on our hands to round out towards the end of the season. So we're going to be pulling off as best as we can, and we do actually end up hindering the Aston Martin, as the Red Bull and the Haas do make a pass on him. I don't know what the AI was thinking there, but he does lose 2 positions, and that's very unlucky for us as we DNF here in the second last race of the season here in Singapore.
And with that, another year of Formula One draws to a close, and a new World Drivers' Champion is declared. Another entry added to that prestigious list of the sport's most incredible drivers. That's a spectacular victory, and with it, the championship is secure. It's been a magnificent season, and they thoroughly deserve the cheers of the crowd here today. Natalie Pinkham, how do you think they were able to set themselves apart today?
Keeping the tyre temperatures up in the tricky wet conditions was really important. There's not much grip at the best of times anyway, and that's 10 times worse if you're on cold tyres. So the way they kept the rubber in its proper operating window was a big advantage today.
Ferrari are at it again. An excellent performance at today's Grand Prix, and they're certainly a team that know what they're doing out there. So then, Natalie Pinkham, who would you rank as your driver of the day?
Often, my go-to would be a driver who's managed to pull off an especially impressive feat during the race. However, in this instance, I was more impressed by Max Verstappen's solid, clean driving throughout the event.
It's time to see how things are shaping up in the Constructors' Championship. No change in the top spot then, but with today's points, their hold on that lead is getting weaker. Meanwhile, AlfaTauri's strong weekend allows them to continue their march up the table. It's been an absolutely wild weekend of Formula One action, and I can't wait to see what's next.
All right, very upsetting, very unsettling for us. I double DNF for Unity Motorsports. Dan Ticktum DNF'd on, what was it, lap 19, lap 19. He DNF'd from a mechanical failure, and I DNF'd a few laps later on lap 21. And it was pretty rough. So we're gonna go ahead and skip to the menu after, okay, they did stay on intermediates. We're gonna go ahead and skip to the menu and see what that DNF is about, and then we'll wrap up this video. All right, so we're back in the menu here. R&D, where is it? Vehicle, another heat component. Even in the rain, we apparently were running the vehicle too hard, so we lost our last heat component. So we're gonna be starting from not really back of the pack of the grid in Mexico, but we will be. I think it's a 10 place. I think. Grid drop penalty. It's usually 10. Following completion of the fitting process, and then depending on where we qualify in Mexico. So yeah, rather than going back to our 91% component and DNFing in the last race, we're gonna just take the penalty and go for another component. All of our other components are looking pretty good as we're rounding out the end of this series here with Mexico to go. So what we're going to do behind the scenes between episodes is see how many upgrades we can get on the car to try and get back into back into P6, possibly P5 for the constructor standings, because Renault and AlfaTauri, not Alpine, sorry, are tied for 5th. And it showed Charles Leclerc at the end of the race there win the World Drivers' Championship. But, that's our trophy slot. So, yeah. Even with the results of the last race, if Charles Leclerc DNFs, he will still win by 5 points if Max Verstappen wins the race. So Charles Leclerc, World Driver Champion of the second season. And Red Bull is fighting to defend their constructors win for the season. So maybe Ferrari can do a lot better on the last race if Carlos Sainz can get up there and get towards the top of the grid, but we will have to wait and see. We might have to help Ferrari and fend off Red Bull as best as we can in Mexico. Try to see if we can get Ferrari to win. But that's basically going to round out the end of the episode. So we will see you guys on next episode as we round out the end of our F1 22 series. Alright, we'll see you guys later.